What if I told you that 1 in 7 people who ever walked this earth died from the same disease? And that in 2023, it killed more people than malaria, typhoid, and war combined. Here's the most chilling part. We know how to cure it, and we have since the 1950s. So why does this quiet killer continue to devastate millions, stalking the trails of injustice we've blazed? John Green's Everything Is Tuberculosis uncovers this devastating paradox, revealing how a single illness became a silent architect of human history and suffering. Prepare to confront the truth behind a forgotten plague. Welcome to Nocturnal Knowledge. Let's begin.
The invisible scourge and personal stakes. To start talking about Everything Is Tuberculosis, let's look at some really personal, sad stories. Think about James Watt, that super smart Scottish inventor who powered the Industrial Revolution. His 15-year-old daughter, Jessie, died from a terrible lung disease called consumption. After that, he got totally obsessed with finding a cure. He tried all sorts of new chemicals, hoping to save his son, Gregory. A friend even said Gregory was literally the most beautiful youth I ever saw. But Gregory suffered for years. He had the usual signs, a constant cough, night sweats, and he just wasted away. That's why they called it consumption. It consumed people. His dad tried everything furiously, but Gregory still died from consumption when he was just 27. 100 years later, this disease, now called tuberculosis, took another young life, this time closer to home. It was my great-uncle, Stokes Goodrich. Stokes was born in 1900 and died at just 29. The family said he passed over the river to his Lord. His dad was a country doctor. He'd delivered tons of babies and given out so much medicine, but he couldn't save his own son. These aren't just two random sad stories. They're part of a massive unseen tragedy. Over the last 200 years, TB has killed more than 1 billion people. Think about that. Some say 1 in 7 people who have ever lived might have died from it. And here's the really wild, almost unbelievable bit. Over 1 million people still died from TB in 2023. That's more than malaria, typhoid, and war altogether. It's the world's deadliest infectious disease again. But here's the messed up part, the truly unfair twist. You can totally cure tuberculosis. We've known how to cure it since the mid-1950s. We know how to live without TB. But like Dr. Peter Mugenyi, a doctor from Uganda, said about another disease that can be cured, the drugs are where the disease isn't, and the disease is where the drugs aren't. So TB isn't just a sickness, it's a huge injustice. But the story of TB isn't just about the germ itself, it's also about us. It's about how we think about sickness, and how those thoughts really change our communities and what we care about. Watt thought consumption was like a machine breaking down. Other people thought it came from coffee and sweets, or maybe demons, or God being mad, or even just drinking too much whiskey. How people understood TB actually changed how they lived and died from it. And super important, who lived and who died. So this book isn't just a history of a disease. It's a look at the human story. It shows the dumb mistakes, the clever ideas, the meanness, and the kindness all mixed up in tuberculosis.
Unmasking the Present, Henry's Reality at Locke. We've talked about how our ideas about tuberculosis changed over time, from thinking it was demons to a body breaking down, and how those ideas really changed who lived and who died. It's been a story of both dumb mistakes and smart moves, kindness and cruelty. But what does all that complicated stuff, what people imagined and how unfair things were, look like today? What's it feel like, right now? To really get it, I had to go to a place called Locke Government Hospital in Sierra Leone. That's what I did. I got to Locke, and honestly, I wasn't ready for it. Like a lot of people, I just figured TB was an old disease, something from history books or for sad poets. But a smart friend once told me, nothing is so privileged as thinking history belongs to the past. And then I met Henry. He just looked like a kid. He introduced himself with a bright, honest smile. His name was Henry, just like my own son, who was 9 back then. This Henry, with his thin legs and big, friendly smile, looked about the same age. He spoke really good English. When I asked how he was, he said with so much hope, "I am happy, sir. I am encouraged." Encouraged, like courage was something you could just call up. Henry became my quick guide. He was excited to show me around the hospital. We walked through the wards, a bunch of buildings that didn't get much air, with barred windows, thin beds, and no toilets. No power, no regular running water. The rooms, I thought, looked like prison cells. It felt really empty, reminding me it used to be a place for people with leprosy. I saw a young man throw up bile and blood. Henry, my young guide, just watched. Everyone knew Henry. They'd rub his head, squeeze his hand. I was totally charmed. But then, a nurse gently shooed him away, and I asked, "Who is that kid?" The answer, whispered, hit me hard. "He's one of the patients we're worried about. He's a patient." I said, "He's such a cute little kid. I hope he's going to be okay." Dr. Michael gave a tight-lipped shrug and told me the crushing truth. Henry wasn't a little boy. He was 17. 17! He was so small and thin because he hadn't had enough food growing up, and then TB made him even skinnier. This bright, brave young man was fighting multi-drug-resistant TB, and the patients at that hospital often heard a local saying, "Laka is the place you go to die. You go in, you don't come out." His body showed all the deep marks of this constant crisis, like a battlefield. His eyes had yellow clouds in the whites, a sign his liver was struggling because of his meds. His neck was swollen, showing the TB had gotten into his lymph nodes. And the injections? He said they burned like a fire under his skin. But for Henry, the worst side effect was hunger. Active TB makes you not want to eat. And even though treatment can make you hungry again, at Laka, food isn't seen as a necessary part of getting better. No one pays for it. So, patients like Henry, getting their appetites back, often dream about food that isn't there. Some, driven by hunger, even leave the hospital, and they end up making the drugs less effective without even meaning to. Henry wrote in his own story, and it painted a harsh picture. "I found myself in a world where food was scarce, water was rationed, and clothing was inadequate for the chilly nights." So this, you see, is the real face of a crisis we often just put in history books. It's a story of deep unfairness happening right now in the hopeful but fragile smile of a boy named Henry. TB's unexpected footprint on history and culture. We just talked about how much pain tuberculosis causes, like for Henry today. But this same disease, this quiet killer, has also secretly changed history for hundreds of years. It's been a hidden force, mixed into our past. It touched everything, from how people dressed to where countries drew their lines, and even things that led to wars. It's crazy how much TB was involved. Take the famous American cowboy hat, for example. You know, the Stetson. Did you know TB actually helped create that classic symbol of the West? Back in the 1850s, a hat maker from New Jersey named John had consumption, which is TB. Doctors told him his best bet was to go west. Like Robert Penn Warren wrote, "West is where we all plan to go someday. It is where consumptives went to extend their lives." John got better. He saw how awful the hats were out on the frontier, so he designed a tough new kind. That became the Stetson. So a famous hat started because of a lung disease. New Mexico also has TB to thank in a way for becoming a state. Congress kept saying no to it joining the US. One reason was that many people there were indigenous or spoke Spanish. To get more white, English-speaking people, New Mexico officials started telling people with TB to move there. They promised dry desert air and really good care. By 1910, about 1 in 10 people in New Mexico were TB patients. This big wave of new residents finally made Congress agree, and New Mexico became a state in 1912. So TB literally helped change the map of America. But here's where it gets even crazier. Did TB, kind of start World War I? Not directly, obviously, but it did play a strange, dark role. The Great War kicked off after someone killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand. 3 of the guys involved were teenagers with TB: Nedeljko Krabinovich, Trifko Grabez, and Gavrilo Princip. They were really sick, and as John Simkin said, they knew they would die soon. So they were therefore willing to give their life for what they believed was a great cause. Then, in a super unlucky twist, Gavrilo Princip ended up right in front of the Archduke's car and shot him. Princip and the other guys with TB went to jail, but all 3 died from their tuberculosis before the war was even over. Now, don't get me wrong. History is way too complex for just one explanation. TB didn't cause World War I, and it wasn't the only reason New Mexico became a state. But these examples show a big truth. Disease and society are connected in ways we often don't see. TB, slowly over time, didn't just kill people, it pushed things along, influenced choices, and became a quiet, powerful force that shaped how people lived, what was popular, and even how countries acted towards each other.
Colonial legacies and health inequity. When we look at certain places, we really see how disease connects to how society was built. History wasn't just a gentle push there, it was a violent shove. Powerful groups shaped these places to take things, to use people. This made communities really weak. Think about Sierra Leone. People often call it a poor country, but that's just wrong. Actually, it's super rich. It has tons of metal ores, and famously, diamonds. For hundreds of years, during colonial rule, these diamonds ended up on British crowns. They didn't just take this wealth by accident. No, they planned it all out carefully. Dr. Baylor Berry, a doctor from Sierra Leone, once said, "If you want to understand why the country is poor, you must look at a map of our railroads." That map shows something clear. The colonial train tracks didn't link people or help local businesses. Instead, they went straight from areas with lots of minerals to the coast. From there, Sierra Leone's natural resources were shipped off fast. All this made an empire far away rich. Schools and clinics? If they even built any, there weren't many, and they were just for the empire's workers, not for the regular people, not to make everyone stronger. See, colonial roads and buildings weren't made to help communities. They were made to drain them. So, this constant weakening, this intentional taking away of everything, left Sierra Leone wide open. In 1991, a terrible civil war broke out. Think about it. The healthcare system was already weak from hundreds of years of being used. Then a war hit and it just fell apart. This is what Isatu, Henry's mom, lived through. She was pregnant, running from violence in Freetown. She remembers those days super clearly. "I couldn't find enough food. I couldn't go to the clinic. Some days I didn't even have a place to sleep." Her dreams for school, for a better future, were just taken away by sickness and war. This ongoing violence and lack of resources wasn't just happening around Henry, it was everything he knew. These past events shaped his fight with tuberculosis now. Henry's sickness, his whole story, shows us clearly and sadly how the world's unfairness, its wrong priorities, actually cause disease. Dr. Joya Mukherjee said it well. Big differences in health aren't caused by our genes, our bodies, or our culture. They're caused by poverty, racism, not enough medical care, and other social stuff. It's wild to think about. Henry got sick not just because of the TB germ. He got sick because of us. The human need for why, assigning meaning to disease. That big realization that Henry was sick not just from Koch's germ, but because of us, hits on something basic about how we see the world. We don't just cause diseases, we really need to give them meaning. Because it's weird, how little we usually think about disease. We ignore how much it changes our stories. Maybe it's because we always want to be in control. We like to think we're in charge of our own lives. That's a nice thought, isn't it? That history is mostly about what we choose. But this need to be in control often stops us from seeing the quiet, hidden things that really shape our lives. Think about it. For thousands of years, people said Alexander the Great died from poison. Super dramatic, right? But the truth? He almost certainly died from typhoid or malaria. We just don't want to live in a world where even the strongest emperor can be killed by a simple bug. So history, it turns out, isn't just about what we do, but also about what happens to us. It's like our basic need to make sense of messy things, to find a pattern in total randomness. Kurt Vonnegut put it perfectly in Cat's Cradle. Tiger gotta hunt, bird gotta fly. Man gotta sit and wonder, why? Tiger gotta sleep, bird gotta land. Man gotta tell himself he understand. We're just wired to figure things out. But here's the thing. A really deep and almost scary idea from Susan Sontag. Nothing is more punitive than to give a disease a meaning. And yet, we totally insist on giving diseases meaning, don't we? It's not just to understand other people's pain. It's a very human, almost automatic way to tell ourselves we'll never feel that pain, that we're safe from it somehow. And tuberculosis, known for hundreds of years as consumption, has been a perfect place for people to make up their own ideas about it. Before we even knew it was a tiny germ, people had to make sense of this relentless illness that made people waste away. What did they come up with? Everything from demon possession to poisoned air. Some thought it was God judging them, a punishment for sins or bad behavior. Others said it came from their lifestyle, drinking too much, bad sex, or not being clean enough. One doctor in the 1700s seriously reported that Mr. Rooks died of consumption after doing 6 unnatural things, including overeating, and get this, constipation. These weren't just weird ideas. You see, these ways of understanding consumption changed not just how people lived and died, but which people lived and died. Because when we give disease meaning, we often end up blaming people too.
The flattering malady, romanticizing consumption. When we try to explain a sickness, we often end up blaming people for it. But here's where it gets kind of wild, and honestly, a bit dark. What happens when a sickness gets so common, like super widespread, that you can't just blame individuals anymore? When it's taking almost everyone around you. Back in the late 1700s and early 1800s, Europe saw tons of people get consumption. It was a huge jump. One doctor even called it the frightful tuberculization of humanity. Think about this. A book called Phantom Plague shared some numbers. Around 15% of deaths in London before 1730 were from consumption. By the early 1800s, that number almost doubled. When almost 1 out of 3 people were dying from it, they couldn't just say it was a sickness for drunk people or those possessed by demons anymore. Too many people were getting sick. It wasn't just a moral problem or weakness, so society had to do something. Maybe not fix the disease itself, but at least change how they thought about it. So get this, in a really weird, almost unbelievable turn, people in Europe in the 1700s and 1800s started to actually romanticize consumption. They began seeing the sickness as beautiful, like it made people more noble. You might think, oh, that's better than shaming people, right? It makes them feel good. But actually, it was just another way to make sick people seem different, like others who weren't like everyone else. They started saying consumption happened to people who were extra sensitive to how delicate and short life was. This kind of made a strange sense to them. In Northern Europe, people thought consumption was something you inherited, like personality quirks. So they figured if you got consumption, you might also have other good traits, like being beautiful, smart, or sensitive. Charlotte Bronte, whose sisters actually died from it, even called it a flattering malady. People with consumption would often get pale and thin. They'd have rosy cheeks and big sunken eyes. This was because of low oxygen and fevers. But these physical signs, which were actually signs of sickness, somehow turned into signals of beauty and worth. Henry David Thoreau even wrote in his journal that disease and decay are often beautiful, like the pearly tear of the shellfish or the hectic glow of consumption. This idea led to something called the consumptive spirit, or specificity. It was basically a belief that being sick actually made artists more brilliant. Dr. Arthur Jacobson, in his book Tuberculosis and the Creative Mind, said TB was like a divine compensation. He meant that sick people's lives were shortened physically, but quickened psychically in a ratio inversely as the shortening. Maybe the romantic poets would die young, but oh, the poems they would write. People thought consumption boosted creative powers. It helped artists like Frédéric Chopin or John Keats connect deeper with their soul as their bodies wasted away. Lord Byron, being dramatic, even said, "I should like, I think, to die of consumption, because then the women would all say, 'See that poor Byron, how interesting he looks in dying.'" This was the specificity in full swing. It was thought that as consumptives got weaker physically, their passionate and creative side would just bloom. But Keats, who used to study medicine, knew what was up when he coughed up blood. He told a friend, "It's arterial blood. That blood is my death warrant. I must die." It's a crazy contradiction, a death sentence hidden behind everyone's admiration. Consumption and feminine beauty ideals. But this weird, scary thing, admiring the dying, wasn't just about smart artists or poets. Nope, it was also about how people with consumption looked, especially women. Charlotte Bronte, whose own sisters died from the disease, even said, "Consumption, I know, is a flattering sickness." And it's true, in a messed up way, it did make them look a certain way. People with active tuberculosis would get really pale and super thin. They'd have rosy cheeks from fever and big, sunken eyes because of low oxygen and constant fevers. But back then, in Europe and the US, these weren't seen as signs of decay. They were seen as signs of delicate beauty and importance. Take Eliza Poe, for example. She was Edgar Allan Poe's mom. People loved how beautiful she looked. Her pale skin, big eyes, and super small, thin body. But it was all because of consumption, which killed her when she was only in her early 20s. By the time Eliza died in 1811, this consumptive chic look, as one historian called it, was everywhere in Europe. It was the beauty standard. Women were told not to exercise much or spend too much time in the sun. Instead, looking tired, weak, and pale was totally in style. A French writer, Henri Mouger, even wrote about a dead consumptive woman. He said her face was glowing, like she had died of beauty. Even medical books talked about how beautiful this look was. Henry Gilbert's 1842 book, Pulmonary Consumption, had lines like, "Her eyes dissolving with a feverish glow of light, and on her cheeks a rosy tint, as if the tip of beauty's finger faintly pressed it there. Alas, consumption is her name." So this created a really confusing situation. They admired both delicacy and weakness. An old magazine from the 1700s tried to explain this look, writing, "The beauty of women is greatly owing to their delicacy or weakness." Delicate sounds good, romantic, but weak? That usually sounds bad, like something to be ashamed of. Yet back then, these two ideas were totally linked. They were key parts of the strange, death-obsessed appeal.
And women, wanting so badly to fit in, did crazy things to get this look. Some put belladonna, which is poisonous, on their eyelids. This made their pupils huge, giving them those big, almost ghostly, consumptive eyes. Magazines even showed how to use red paint to fake those flushed, feverish cheeks and lips. It's so weird, right? To actually want the signs of a deadly sickness. But honestly, you can still see hints of these old beauty ideas today. They still shape what many places think is beautiful. Still, it's important to remember these ideas aren't everywhere. For example, in places like Sierra Leone, that same thinness, those same wide eyes, don't look beautiful. They look like someone is sick or hasn't grown properly. It really shows how much culture changes what we think about health, and even what we think is beautiful.
Whiteness and the civilized disease. So this idea that being sick could make you beautiful, it wasn't just about looks. It really changed how people saw who got sick with this flattering disease. If having consumption meant you were refined or delicate, then it got totally linked to being white and civilized. And that's messed up. Like an essay from 1807 called On the Beauty of Skin actually said, a white skin, slightly tinged with carnation, soft and smooth to the touch, is what we commonly call a fine skin. For these people, being white was the most essential quality of the skin. They praised beauty that looked like alabaster or marble, almost see-through, like life wouldn't last long. This obsession wasn't just about how people looked, it completely messed up how they understood the disease. Doctors who were white in Europe and the US started to believe consumption was a disease of civilization. They thought only really sensitive, smart people got it. So in their twisted thinking, if it was a civilized disease, uncivilized people couldn't possibly get it. They even called it the white man's plague. One American doctor went as far as saying it was a disease of the master race, not of the slave race. Can you imagine? Because of this wild denial, tons of sick people and deaths from tuberculosis among enslaved people, colonized groups, and others on the margins just weren't counted or even acknowledged. Take India, for example. In 1829, a doctor there said lung disease was rare and readily cured, but that wasn't true at all. The actual truth was right there, but the colonial leaders just chose to ignore it on purpose. If they admitted how many Black Americans or people in India or Africa were really suffering from consumption, it would have totally broken their main idea of white supremacy. That idea was why they felt okay colonizing everyone in the first place. So the story they told about the disease became a tool. It was a scary way to keep their power, slipping right into the unfair systems they'd already set up. From inherited malady to infectious agent. But those scary reasons, those stories people made up that ignored all the suffering, they were only part of the story. For centuries, before we really knew about tiny germs, people didn't understand consumption at all. It was a big mystery, full of guesses, fear, and even a weird kind of admiration. This was before 1882, the year everything changed. People just grabbed at any explanation they could think of. They shaped the story of the disease around things like power, family history, what they thought was right or wrong, and even beauty. What caused consumption? We always want to know why, so people came up with all sorts of theories, some really strange. For a long time in Northern Europe, they widely believed it was something you inherited, passed down through families. And here's where it gets really crazy. This deadly disease was often seen as romantic. Can you believe that? People thought it would give you a consumptive spirit. It supposedly made you super sensitive, an artistic genius, and even gave you a delicate, almost ghost-like beauty. Charlotte Bronte, whose sisters died from it, even called consumption a flattering illness. Patients were seen as delicate, pure, and doomed, with rosy cheeks and wide sunken eyes that people thought made them look lovely. Other common ideas were just as confusing, maybe a bad climate, or even depressing emotions, thinking too much, or doing 6 unnatural things, like eating too much or staying up late. Every theory, no matter how weird, gave people a story. It made them feel like they understood, and more importantly, knew who might get sick. But as the Industrial Revolution exploded during the 1700s and 1800s, things changed big time. Millions moved from the countryside into packed, overflowing cities. They were crammed into tiny apartments and working in stuffy factories. This wasn't some fancy artistic scene. It was more like a huge breeding ground for sickness. As one journalist, Vidya Krishnan, put it, TB followed money, basically. This harsh, obvious reality made people rethink things. Consumption wasn't just for delicate artists or sad rich people anymore. It mostly made the poor city folk sick, those living in the dreary tenements and working in dark and crowded shops, as René and Jean Dubos noticed. The romance was totally gone. It was just suffering and misery now, showing that consumption was a scary disease for people on the edges of society. So with all this sickness everywhere, no one really understood it, and the theories didn't make sense. We needed a new answer. Then, in 1882, a quiet German doctor named Robert Koch gave it to us, clearing up hundreds of years of guessing. He looked through his microscope and found it. A bothersome little organism, he called it, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, the actual biological cause. Koch's discovery was a huge deal. It completely broke down all those complex, often mean stories people had made up about consumption. Suddenly, that idea of an inherited condition that grew the soul by shrinking the body just vanished. Instead, tuberculosis appeared, an infectious disease. No romance left, just a clear, terrible horror spreading fast among the poor. It changed not just how we did science, but how we thought about who gets sick and why.
The race for a cure, Koch, Pasteur, and scientific nationalism. Koch finding Mycobacterium tuberculosis was a huge step, like a quiet revolution happening right there under his microscope. But this discovery didn't happen by itself. To really get why everyone was desperate for a cure after that, we need to look beyond the lab and at what was going on in the world back then in the 1800s. See, the Franco-Prussian War had just wrapped up, only 10 years before Koch showed his finding. France and Germany were still sore and super patriotic, so they found a new fight: science. Medical breakthroughs weren't just about making people healthy anymore. As the book says, they were essential to German success. Germany had won the war partly because their soldiers got better medical care, like with antiseptics cutting down deaths. But then, Louis Pasteur came along. This French doctor was already famous in the 1860s, mostly for his work on how wine ferments. But by the early 1880s, Pasteur wasn't just proving Koch's idea that bacteria caused anthrax. He was making a vaccine for it, a fix. German officials were really annoyed. A book quotes them saying it was a deeply disappointing blow that the German Koch's discovery of anthrax was usurped just a few years later by the French Pasteur's vaccine for anthrax. And Pasteur kept going. He quickly made a cholera vaccine too. The message was loud and clear, and it made Germans furious. Germans might find what caused diseases, but it looked like only the French discovered actual cures. Robert Koch, even with his own growing fame, was perpetually envious of Pasteur's success at producing real remedies. Think about the pressure. Germany was literally cheering scientific wins like they were war victories against their heritage enemy, France. Koch had found the enemy for TB, that annoying little germ, but he hadn't found anything to beat it. Pasteur, though, was throwing around magical serums. All this national pride mixed with his own ego pushed Koch to the edge. And that may be why, the book hints, at the height of his fame, Robert Koch abandoned his trademark intellectual rigor and declared that he had discovered a cure for tuberculosis. He showed off a clear brown liquid he called tuberculin. His first tests were super casual. He injected himself, his girlfriend Hedwig, and 2 helpers. They all got really sick fast, within hours. He noted they were suffering unusually violent shivering. But then, less than a day later, they felt better and were completely fine. It seemed like Pasteur's fever cure, where a safe exposure makes you immune. Koch said his serum didn't just stop TB, it cured people who already had it. Everyone, desperate for a fix for consumption, listened, and they all rushed to Berlin.
Tuberculin's promise and peril. And people really rushed to Berlin. Everyone was desperate, full of hope, watching as thousands of very sick patients started their trip to Germany's capital. These weren't just curious folks, these were people facing death. They had sunken eyes and bad coughs, holding on to what little cash they had. They got on trains, carriages, anything that would move, sure that Robert Koch had their cure. The city filled up with dying people. Many passed away in crowded hotel rooms or even on the streets, just waiting for a shot at this amazing brown liquid. It must have been quite a sight. Koch, this famous scientist, seemed to have won, just like Pasteur had with his vaccines. But Koch, maybe in a hurry or a bit jealous, stopped doing the careful science that made him famous. He thought he'd found a fever cure in his early tests. People got really sick, then got better. But as the book explains, tuberculin wasn't a cure. Instead, it was a dangerous trick. René and Jean Dubos later wrote that it soon became obvious that tuberculin killed many more patients than it helped. And here's where things get really interesting. Another small-town doctor with big plans, but for different reasons, also heard Koch's big announcement. Dr. Arthur Conan Doyle. Yes, the Arthur Conan Doyle. He'd later create Sherlock Holmes. Known for thinking things through and relying on facts, he felt a strong urge to go to Berlin. So he packed his bags, left his doctor's office, and traveled there. He wanted to understand this new medicine for himself. What he found was very different from the cure Koch promised. Conan Doyle, with his sharp doctor's mind, quickly saw that while tuberculin did affect TB patients, it didn't actually cure them. He noticed the serum seemed to kill infected tissue, but the key thing was it didn't get rid of the bacteria itself. He put it very clearly, writing, "It is as if a man whose house was infested with rats were to remove the marks of the creatures every morning and expect in that way to get rid of them." Tuberculin, he said, was in the business of picking up rat shit, not in the business of killing rats. Conan Doyle saw what Koch couldn't, maybe because Koch was too focused on his own goals and national pride. The serum actually made people already infected with TB have a strong reaction. It often made them sicker, not better. Conan Doyle understood it wasn't a cure or a vaccine. But here's the clever part of what he realized. That specific immune reaction could actually be helpful. Since tuberculin only caused a reaction in people who'd already been infected, it meant it could be a way to test for the disease. Think about this. Koch, his girlfriend Hedwig, and his assistants all got really sick after getting the injection. Why? Because as Conan Doyle figured out, they were already infected with tuberculosis. Just like most people in Northern Europe back then. Tuberculin didn't cure them, it just showed they already had the infection. So this failed cure finally found its real use. Even today, doctors inject tiny amounts of tuberculin under the skin as a simple test. If someone gets a swollen spot where they got the shot, it means their immune system knows the TB bacteria. They've seen it before, even if the infection is just sitting there without symptoms. It's a way to check for the infection, not a treatment. It finds the infection but doesn't cure it. Robert Koch, stuck in his own false beliefs, ended up disgraced. He kept believing his liquid was the cure. Arthur Conan Doyle, though, went back to England. Within 10 years, he published his first Sherlock Holmes story, tying himself forever to finding the truth, much like how he carefully checked out Koch's big, but wrong, discovery.
The invisible scourge and personal stakes. To start talking about Everything Is Tuberculosis, let's look at some really personal, sad stories. Think about James Watt, that super smart Scottish inventor who powered the Industrial Revolution. His 15-year-old daughter, Jessie, died from a terrible lung disease called consumption. After that, he got totally obsessed with finding a cure. He tried all sorts of new chemicals, hoping to save his son, Gregory. A friend even said Gregory was literally the most beautiful youth I ever saw. But Gregory suffered for years. He had the usual signs, a constant cough, night sweats, and he just wasted away. That's why they called it consumption. It consumed people. His dad tried everything furiously, but Gregory still died from consumption when he was just 27. 100 years later, this disease, now called tuberculosis, took another young life, this time closer to home. It was my great-uncle, Stokes Goodrich. Stokes was born in 1900 and died at just 29. The family said he passed over the river to his Lord. His dad was a country doctor. He'd delivered tons of babies and given out so much medicine, but he couldn't save his own son. These aren't just two random sad stories. They're part of a massive unseen tragedy. Over the last 200 years, TB has killed more than 1 billion people. Think about that. Some say 1 in 7 people who have ever lived might have died from it. And here's the really wild, almost unbelievable bit. Over 1 million people still died from TB in 2023. That's more than malaria, typhoid, and war all together. It's the world's deadliest infectious disease again. But here's the messed up part, the truly unfair twist. You can totally cure tuberculosis. We've known how to cure it since the mid-1950s. We know how to live without TB. But like Dr. Peter Mugenyi, a doctor from Uganda, said about another disease that can be cured, the drugs are where the disease isn't, and the disease is where the drugs aren't. So TB isn't just a sickness, it's a huge injustice. But the story of TB isn't just about the germ itself, it's also about us. It's about how we think about sickness and how those thoughts really change our communities and what we care about. Watt thought consumption was like a machine breaking down. Other people thought it came from coffee and sweets, or maybe demons, or God being mad, or even just drinking too much whiskey. How people understood TB actually changed how they lived and died from it. And super important, who lived and who died. So this book isn't just a history of a disease. It's a look at the human story. It shows the dumb mistakes, the clever ideas, the meanness, and the kindness all mixed up in tuberculosis. Containing the invisible threat, early public health. Justifying a social order that treated some people as less than fully human. It also let those in power off the hook for their part in it. It was a truly awful thing, built on a lie. But that lie, that cruel way of giving disease a meaning, really shaped how we understood things. And it shaped our desperate, often clumsy tries to fight it. See, for centuries, before anyone really understood Robert Koch's annoying little germ, people just put all their fears and biases onto tuberculosis. This led to some wild and, frankly, bizarre ways they tried to contain this invisible threat. Can you imagine a world where a doctor might say a serious sickness was caused by a dog which barked loudly at her? Or maybe overworking one's mind and exhausting one's energy? It's wild to think about. But even once we started to figure out the truth that Mycobacterium tuberculosis spread through the air, in coughs and spit, and even through bad milk from cows, the world's attempts to contain this hidden enemy got truly wild. Sometimes they were even ridiculous. Suddenly, public health campaigns popped up everywhere. They focused on things they could actually see carrying germs. Charles Dickens, for example, once called the U.S. a nation of spitters. So cities actually banned spitting in public. They told people to cover their coughs and sneezes with a handkerchief, or if they didn't have one, with a hand. They even advised against kissing babies. That makes sense, sure, but it also gave us some really famous, serious-looking posters. But the obsession with being clean went deep. Picture this. Library books were cleaned all the time, just in case a stray germ jumped from one reader to the next through a novel. Streets were regularly watered down before sweeping, all to stop tiny, invisible dust bits from spreading germs into homes and neighborhoods. And houseflies? Everyone thought they were pure evil. People truly believed flies carried TB from the spit of the consumptive to the nipple of the baby's bottle. So everyone rushed to screen windows and porches. They were convinced these tiny insects were bringing death. And then there were the whiskers. Get this. Dr. Edwin F. Bowers said in 1916 that the Amazonian jungles of a well-whiskered face held legion, meaning tons, of bacteria. The fear of TB germs hiding in beards led to the revolt against the whisker, which started a time when everyone shaved clean. It's almost comical, isn't it? We just grabbed at anything we could see to blame, anything to control. But it wasn't just about physical fears. People also worried a lot about being morally clean. You see, the idea that one could not drink too much or overindulge in any other vice without risking inviting TB into one's body really stuck. So in this desperate fight against something they couldn't see, they weren't just battling germs. They were battling spit, dust, flies, beards, and worst of all, what they saw as each other's mistakes. What a mess of science, old beliefs, and trying to control people.
Sanatoria, retreats of rest and control. This mix of science, old beliefs, and social control took us to some interesting places. When simple habits like spitting and having beards seemed suspicious and people thought bad morals could make you sick, what did they do to try and get control? They isolated people. But it wasn't just any kind of isolation. For hundreds of years, people thought if bad air caused consumption, then good air could fix it. Get this, almost 2,000 years before we even knew what tuberculosis was, the Roman Dr. Galen said sea voyages could cure it. Aretaeus of Cappadocia even told people to go to Turkey. He thought the air in Apollo's famous cypress groves would help those weak in the lungs. People had different reasons, but one thing was always true. Consumption got worse in busy, crowded cities. So the fix had to be out in the country. This old idea of a travel cure really took off in the early 1900s. It became a worldwide thing with special places we called sanatoria. The idea was simple: clean air, lots of rest, and plenty of sun. Doctors often rolled patients outside, sometimes still in bed or on special chairs, so they could get that light and breathe deep. They thought it would give them new hope and courage, like a natural way to fight the sickness. But here's the real deal. These sanatoria weren't just for getting better. They were also a huge way to control society. They did two things. Yes, they helped sick people, but also, and this was key, they stopped the spread by taking people with TB out of their towns. Sheila Rockman said they were too prison-like to be a hospital and too hospital-like to be a prison. Every little part of a patient's life was told to them: what to eat, when to sleep, even how they should feel. And get this, whole cities in the US pretty much started because of this search for a cure, like Pasadena, California, and Colorado Springs, Colorado. These places were basically built for people with TB and their families. Southern California became a land of new lungs. Thousands of lungers moved there, like in a gold rush. They all wanted that perfect healing place. By 1925, the U.S. had 536 sanatoria with almost 670,000 beds. That's almost as many beds for all other sicknesses put together. It was a huge effort, showing how much people wanted a fix. It was a big test of where to put people and how to keep them separate. It was all driven by a mix of fear and hope. People really believed in the right air, under the right sun, they'd find a cure.
The patient experience: confinement, monotony, and rebellion. Trying to find a cure for some illnesses led to a huge effort. Building special places, sanatoriums, far away from everything. Millions ended up stuck in these places, feeling scared but also hopeful. But what was life really like inside those walls, under that healing sun? Most patients just felt endless boredom, like Henry in Sierra Leone said a century later. Can you imagine? Your illness was you. People called patients invalids, which really says it all. It meant you were basically cut off from society, not a valid part of it anymore. You were separated from your family and everything you knew. The cure promised rest, fresh air, and sunshine. But the reality was, your life was totally boxed in. The doctor in charge controlled everything about your life. We're talking about what to eat, when to sleep, who you could see, and even what to think about. They told you that if you didn't just give in to all this control, it was like killing yourself. And the rules were wild. Patients couldn't move too much. They couldn't even write letters or comb their own hair. But here's maybe the craziest rule. They were told not to feel too intensely, not to drink alcohol, and not to have sex. Doctors called these exciting behaviors and worried they could literally make your tuberculosis worse. It's almost absurd, right? To have your body and your feelings so totally controlled? Someone even said one sanatorium was too prison-like to be a hospital and too hospital-like to be a prison. But here's the thing about human nature. It rebels. Even with all those strict rules, patients found clever ways to cope. In bigger places, they started their own newsletters and newspapers. These helped people connect and share what they were going through. Some even had patient-run radio stations. And gossip, of course, was always a way to connect and get excited, especially about romances. Doctors tried to stop them, but these happened a lot. Most invalids just couldn't help but be, well, human. Think of Gail Perkins, a child in a sanatorium in the 1930s. They told her a good attitude and total obedience were key to staying alive. But at night, she remembered the children sobbed, calling for their mothers. The nurses would come in and say, "Silence, everyone!" They didn't want anyone crying in public so it wouldn't bring down everyone's spirits. If Gail wet the bed or cried out loud, she'd be punished with isolation. They'd put a screen around her bed, no toys, no talking. And then there's the heartbreaking story of her best friend, Angie. Angie's father kept writing letters in his dead daughter's handwriting to his living daughter. He was scared the truth would be too much for her. It just shows how much institutions tried to control people, but how human spirit, with all its messiness and strength, always pushed back. These people were living proof that even though places could control a lot, they could never put out that deep, stubborn spark of human connection and feeling.
Childhood in the shadow of sanatoria, Gail Perkins' story. Put out that strong feeling of being connected and caring, but even that feeling was really put to the test for kids stuck in these places. Their young lives were taken over by sickness and doctors always being in charge. Think about Gail Perkins' tough time. She got bone TB in the mid-1930s. Gail was only 3 when she got to Lakeville Sanatorium in Massachusetts. Her body was already messed up, so she needed years of painful traction and body casts. Gail spent 12 long years of her childhood inside those walls. Imagine how scary the quiet was every night. Gail remembered the children sobbed, calling for their mothers. The nurses would come in and say, "Silence, everyone." Crying, which is a basic way to show fear or sadness, was strictly forbidden. They thought it was bad for everyone's spirits. If little Gail, at 4, cried or wet the bed, she was punished right away. They'd pull a screen around her bed. No toys, no talking. They'd scold her for her bad attitude. They saw her spirit as a problem for getting better. She was supposed to get well by lying perfectly still. She couldn't even talk or laugh. It's a chilling look at a system that cared most about being totally in charge. Then Gail accidentally found out an almost unbearable secret. Remember Angie's father?
He carefully faked letters in his dead daughter Pauline's handwriting for Angie, who was still alive. He truly believed that the emotional shock of the truth could kill her. Young Gail understood this big, desperate lie of love and hiding things. She carried that secret, never telling Angie. But then something happened. Gail was 8 when she saw them wheeling a stretcher with a body on it down to the morgue. I knew right away it was my best friend Angie. This isn't just a sad story, it's a horrible truth about what happens when these places care more about what they think is good for health than real human ties. This clear example shows exactly what doctor and anthropologist Paul Farmer called control over care. Sanatoria weren't just for healing people. They were places where doctors had total control. The supervising doctor controlled the smallest details of the patient's life. Patients couldn't decide anything for themselves. Patients were clearly told they'd only survive if they obeyed all the rules of the institution. Even after Gail finally went home as a teenager thanks to streptomycin, the shadow of TB stayed with her. People judged them so much. Many survivors were told to tell friends and family they'd been in the hospital for polio, not TB. Polio was seen as less shameful. Gail survived. She found joy, built a family, and became a clown. A beautiful, funny way of fighting back. But she and many others kept their real illness a secret. They were forever marked by a disease society insisted was their fault, not just a sickness.
Glimmers of hope, diagnostics, and vaccination. People often felt blamed and ashamed, but we weren't helpless. Scientists slowly started to understand things better. This gave people hope that maybe we didn't have to just give up. What if we could actually see this invisible enemy instead of just watching what it did to people? Then came a huge step forward, the X-ray. It let us see inside a living person without cutting them open. Think about it. Before the late 1800s, the only way to know the internal damage from TB was after someone died. But then X-rays arrived, and by the 1930s, they started showing the first signs of the disease even before people felt sick. Someone amazing, Dr. Alan Hart, really pushed this forward. Hart was a trans man, and he got chased out of town from San Francisco in 1918. Headlines hounded him like, "Girl poses as male doctor in hospital," as if he was just pretending to be himself. But even though he spent his life outrunning gossip, moving 7 times in 9 years, he was brilliant. He got a graduate degree in radiology, and his work showed how chest X-rays could find TB really early. This was like a secret weapon. It meant doctors could step in faster, suggest better nutrition, and people had a much better chance of living. Even today, mobile X-ray machines are carried on backs into rural communities, still saving lives and continuing Hart's fight. And then another good sign, a vaccine. The Bacillus Calmette-Guérin, or BCG, came out in 1921, based on a smart idea. It was like how cowpox protected us from smallpox. So could a weaker version of cow TB protect us from the humankind? French researchers had some trial and error, finding a weaker strain that grew in potatoes and beef bile. Yep, beef bile. They used this to make our only TB vaccine, and we still use it over 100 years later. But here's the thing about BCG. It's a superhero for kids, especially those under 5. It stops them from getting severe TB, saving so many young lives. For teens and adults, though, it doesn't work nearly as well. It's not particularly effective and maybe not at all effective at preventing infection, serious illness, or death. So it's a strange situation. It's super important, but it's not the full answer. It saves a lot of child deaths, yes, but it can't stop TB completely on its own. It's a key part of the puzzle, but not the whole picture. We keep learning more, but we also keep needing to know more, so the search never stops. New vaccines look promising and are in final tests.
This means adults might soon get better protection too. And it's not just vaccines. We're still looking for even smarter ways to test for TB. Imagine quick, cheap TB tests using simple tongue swabs, or mobile digital X-rays with AI to help spot the disease quicker and better. We keep looking, pushing the limits because TB is still a mystery and we really want to stop it. We keep digging into its secrets, determined to find better ways to see and cure this stubborn enemy.
The age of antibiotics, from incurable to curable. For ages, we've tried hard to figure out and cure tough diseases. And it's wild to think how close we often are to big changes without even realizing it. Back in 1941, a book about lung tuberculosis said, "A cure still seems far off." But really, that cure was just a few years away. Imagine people suffering for thousands of years. Then, all of a sudden, tuberculosis became something doctors could treat. And then they could even cure it. This wasn't just one big discovery. It was years of steady research into bacteria and how to kill them. In Sweden, a doctor named Jürgen Lehmann got an idea to mess with how the bacteria kept itself alive. He found something called para-amino salicylic acid, or PAS. It was an early drug, but it worked. Then a bigger discovery came. In 1944, two students at Rutgers, Albert Schatz and Elizabeth Bougie, found a really strong new antibiotic, streptomycin. This was the first drug that truly worked against TB. Think about it. American soldiers who were very sick got this medicine. Bob Dole, who later became a senator, almost died but was saved by it. And Gail Perkins, who we've talked about, could finally leave the sanatorium for good after 13 years, all thanks to streptomycin in the late 1940s. It made a huge difference right away. In the UK, for example, TB deaths dropped by 90% in just 10 years. But it didn't stop there. To make streptomycin even stronger, another drug called isoniazid worked really well. Then, by 1952, they found pyrazinamide, which also killed TB bacteria. This is where things really clicked. Doctors started trying these drugs together. By the mid-1950s, they had tested and approved this way of using multiple drugs at once. TB wasn't just something you could treat anymore. For many people, you could cure it. This changed everything in a massive way. Sanatoria, those big hospitals that had millions of TB patients just 10 years earlier, they just emptied out across the US and Europe. Picture the silence, that sudden quiet where before it was full of coughs and sad whispers. Scientists kept looking for more. They found two more key antibiotics, ethambutol in 1961 and rifampin in 1966. And from those, the best treatment plan came out, RIPE. That's short for rifampin, isoniazid, pyrazinamide, and ethambutol. All of a sudden, it seemed like this old, deadly sickness was almost wiped out. Louis Pasteur had said that science wouldn't always be powerless against such enemies, and he was right. For a wonderful moment, it really felt like TB would just become a footnote in history. The curable disease that kills. Persistent inequity. But here's the thing about good times and bad, about hoping and giving up. As doctor and researcher Anik Roulian wrote in 1991, in the long history of tuberculosis in man, despair follows hope. Triumph and tragedies succeed each other. And boy, was she right. Remember that hopeful moment we just talked about? That feeling like TB was almost gone for everyone? Well, that story took a really bad turn. It was all because of a deep, ongoing unfairness. So while hospitals for TB in the US and Europe emptied out, becoming like ghost towns from a disease that was mostly gone there, the cure, this amazing ripe treatment, just didn't get to the places that needed it most for decades. Think about it. This wasn't ages ago. This was 1980. And in many poorer countries like busy markets in India or far-off villages in Ethiopia, the number of people dying from TB was just like Europe's numbers a century before antibiotics even existed. For example, in 1990, Ethiopia's TB death rates were about the same as America's in 1882. That's the same year Robert Koch found that venomous little atom that causes TB. It felt like the cure didn't exist for them. The sickness was where the medicine wasn't, and the medicine was where the sickness wasn't. So why? Why was there such a huge gap between what science could do and what people actually did? It's a mix of global politics and money. But maybe the worst part was racism and colonialism. There was this terrible old belief, pushed even by respected people like S. Lyle Cummins, that folks in poor communities, especially in Africa, were too childlike in respect to mentality and outlook, so they couldn't be trusted with the complex ripe treatment. That shocking lie turned into policy. It meant millions of people couldn't get the help they needed to live. This wasn't just a small mistake in planning, it was a choice made on purpose, even if no one said it out loud. The systems in place, or actually the systems not in place, after hundreds of years of colonizing and taking resources, were never meant to get medical help to everyone. They were made to serve empires, to take things, not to give. And when it came to the cost of saving lives, powerful countries often made a different choice. They cared more about money than people. This kept a cruel cycle going where the poorest people died because of our shared prejudices. Directly observed therapy, DOTS, and its limitations. So after all these problems and unfair ideas built up over time, a solution finally appeared for giving TB care to lots of people. But wow, what a solution. It came from the same messed up way of thinking, where money mattered more than people, just in a new wrapping. It started in the 1970s, mostly for poor communities that were still struggling because of colonization. It was called DOTS, Directly Observed Therapy, short course. Dr. Joya Mukherjee says that by the late 1890s, many countries in Africa and Asia spent less than $5 per person each year on health. So, the idea was if people were going to get any care, it had to be really organized and most of all, cheap. The idea was simple and too familiar. Find TB by looking at a sputum sample under a microscope. This method was basically the same way Robert Koch found it back in 1882. Here's the problem though. This test misses half of all cases. Seriously, half, 50%, especially for kids like young Henry, whose first test showed nothing. Then everyone, no matter what kind of infection they had or if it was drug-resistant, got the same standard ripe medicine. It was a one-size-fits-all plan for a really tricky disease, lasting 6 to 9 months. But here's where the directly observed part comes in, and this is the wild part. Patients had to take their medicine every single day with someone who wasn't family watching them. A lot of times this meant a tough trip to a clinic every day. Can you imagine? You're really sick, weak from the disease and side effects, fighting terrible hunger from the very drugs meant to cure you, and you have to travel miles, maybe pay for transport you don't have, just to be watched swallow pills. This made clear system problems, like no medicine sometimes, super high travel costs, awful side effects, the extreme hunger the drugs cost, and the deep shame seem like patient noncompliance. Not a broken system, but the patient's fault. It's that creepy feeling of not being trusted, right? Like patients can't be trusted with their own lives, with getting better. Dr. Jiram Tefera, who worked in Ethiopia and later at Laka, told me about patients who couldn't get diagnosed or treated because they couldn't travel. They lost their jobs and way to earn money just trying to show up. Think of the young woman who quit treatment because the pills, taken on an empty stomach since she couldn't afford food, gave her terrible stomach pain. Or Robert, the Haitian man, losing over half his family's land just to buy some drugs that weren't even enough. This wasn't about not following rules. It was a desperate fight against impossible problems. And if I, with all my advantages, struggled to take my daily pills for OCD and depression, how can we blame someone fighting TB, poverty, and being all alone? As Dr. Jennifer Furin said so well, I don't know any other part of medicine where treatment is so completely built on not trusting patients. So, while DOTS definitely saved millions of lives,
giving some organized care where there was none at all. It was also, as Dr. Carol Mitnick put it, like any solution that tries to fit everyone, DOTS will fail many people. It didn't deal with the growing problem of drug-resistant TB. It missed tons of cases, and it showed a deep, almost colonial way of thinking. It saw poor people not as individuals who needed specific care, but as a problem to fix with the cheapest, most bossy method possible. So it was a step forward, sure, but it was flawed. It was built on not trusting people, and that still causes problems for TB care today.
The human face of MDR-TB, Henry's ordeal. People didn't trust poor patients to take care of themselves. This wasn't just some official rule, it was a real tragedy for so many. And Henry Ryder's story shows this most clearly. It's heartbreaking. When I met Henry in Lhasa, he was 17, but he looked much younger because he was so thin. His fight with TB had started way earlier, when he was just 6. Doctors said he had TB, and at first he took the usual 4 drugs. But then, his dad made a big decision. He probably didn't trust the hospitals, since they often failed people. Henry's dad didn't see him getting better fast, so he took him off the medicine. Instead, he took Henry to a traditional faith healer. Doctors can't fix this, Henry's dad believed. He thought it was a spiritual sickness, something God's healer should treat. It's easy to judge that choice now. But back then, Sierra Leone was torn apart by civil war. Hospitals weren't always reliable. Traditional healers, though, offered something important, a human touch, a feeling of being understood. But the faith healers' help didn't really work, and this is where the problem with not trusting patients with treating everyone the same really shows up. Because fast tests to see which drugs would work were too expensive or just not around, Henry was put back on the same old drugs. They were useless. Finally, after years of this terrible fight, they figured out Henry had multi-drug resistant TB. Think about that. The disease had changed inside him, partly because he stopped his medicine before. This meant a new, much harsher treatment called the injectables. Imagine, these were super strong antibiotics. They gave him painful shots every day. Lots of people who took them, more than 20%, lost their hearing permanently. And one day, Henry, our bright, sweet Henry, woke up only able to hear out of one ear. He kept it a terrifying secret. He was sure if he told anyone, they'd stop his treatment altogether, and that would be his death sentence. The mental stress of all this, seriously, it's hard to even imagine. At Lhasa, Henry found comfort in Thompson, an older patient. Henry later said Thompson was a ghost of my future, meaning he saw his own fate in him. This strong connection, this shared pain, made Thompson getting worse and dying hit Henry really hard. One morning, Thompson was just gone. He died, struggling to breathe. That thought scared Henry badly. "You are next, Henry. You are next," he heard in his mind, a constant scary whisper. He stopped eating. His TB was getting worse, with huge, painful bumps breaking through his skin. On top of that, he felt a crushing, deep sadness. He had to stay in his room, kept away from other patients because his TB was so bad and contagious. He saw his future not as someone who'd live a normal life, but a painful, lonely death at just 18. This was the brutal truth of TB when it felt like there were no more options.
The struggle for tailored treatment. Henry was stuck in his room. He saw a future where all the cures had run out. It made sense he was so despairing because things looked awful. But even in this really tough time, with his shots not working and the scary thought of "you're next," something new was starting for him. It was all because someone was super committed, even with all the big problems in the system. That's where we meet Dr. Giram Tefera. He's a doctor at Lhasa Government Hospital, and he proved that sometimes one person can really make a big difference. Dr. Giram, an Ethiopian doctor, came to Sierra Leone because the TB problem there was huge. He didn't see Lhasa as a place to give up. Instead, he called it a place for complete magic. He really took on the tough challenge of tuberculosis, especially when it affected poor people who were already struggling. "What makes me want to stay a TB doctor," he told me, "is I see so many helpless people. Most of the patients getting diagnosed are from poor families, from groups who are often overlooked. What keeps me going is they come in almost dead, and if you find the right treatment, it's complete magic." He'd met Henry and first thought the boy's strong spirit meant he was a staff member. But then he found out Henry was a patient, and his last hope, the shots, wasn't working. Dr. Bohème knew this kind of story usually ended with doctors giving up. But Dr. Bohème just couldn't give up on Henry or any of his patients. With TB, he insisted, you have to keep trying. His strong will went against what big global health groups often said. They'd usually dismiss personal treatments for tough cases, saying they were too expensive, too hard, or just not possible in countries without a lot of money. The truth was, Sierra Leone didn't have the newer drugs, like bedaquiline and delamanid, that could offer some hope for Henry's multi-drug-resistant TB. These drugs, even though public money often helped fund them, were protected by patents and cost so much. They were totally out of reach for Sierra Leone's Ministry of Health. Think about it, needing a cure, knowing it's out there, but you can't get it because it costs over $1,000 for an 18-month treatment. This is in a country where healthcare budgets are often less than $5 per person per year. So the solution had to be almost like magic. Dr. Bohème started looking all over the world, talking to colleagues in other countries, trying to put together a custom mix of experimental drugs for Henry. This wasn't a normal prescription, it was a special request, a super tricky operation. Drugs might come from nearby Liberia, or flown in from places as far away as Lesotho, where other hospitals had started new ways to treat TB. But getting the drugs wasn't the only hard part. Henry's own body had more hurdles. He had comorbidities, which are other health problems that made choosing drugs tricky. Some drugs had side effects that could hurt his already weak liver or kidneys even more. This wasn't just about finding any medicine. It was about finding the right medicine for Henry. It was a really careful, risky effort to give him personal care, even though the whole system was broken. It was a huge gamble, a desperate try, all because he deeply cared for one 18-year-old stuck in an impossible situation.
A father's rage and a doctor's promise. The push for a special mix of drugs, a last shot for Henry, really came from strong love. But strong feelings can turn into real pain when you start losing hope. Henry, a young guy who seemed so full of life, had watched his friend Thompson die from the disease, like a preview of his own future. The shots, their last hope, weren't working for Henry either. He looked angry, like he knew he was next. And his dad was so mad and sad. He felt like the system had failed his son again and again. Henry had been stuck for 200 days in Lhasa. People said that's where you went to die. But Henry was just getting sicker. All this sadness led to a big fight. Henry's dad, a man who already got angry easily and felt like the broken system had left him alone, stood in front of Dr. Bohème. The doctor was new to Sierra Leone and didn't speak much Creole yet. He felt the dad's anger. The dad yelled that his son needed to go home, go back to school, get his life back. He didn't see a cure, just more suffering. "Then let him die at home," he said. And then a scary promise he was so desperate. If he couldn't take his son, he'd come back tomorrow and beat Dr. Bohème. Picture it, a small, hot room, a doctor new to the country, a furious dad. You could feel all the anger from years of things going wrong. But in this crazy situation, something else started happening. Dr. Bohème, even though he was scared and didn't speak the language well, really understood what was going on, deep down. He later thought, "I tried to remember that this man, he just wants his son at home. He does not want his son to die alone. I understand this. I am also a father."
This wasn't just about being a doctor. He really felt for the man. And then he made a brave, kind of unbelievable promise. He looked Henry's father in the eye and said, "If you take your boy away now, all the work we have done is for nothing. Don't hit me today. Beat me later if this fails." He was begging for time, for trust. He truly believed there was still a chance. Meanwhile, Henry, alone in his room, was making a really tough choice. He felt scared and hopeless. He was stuck between his dad's strong, maybe wrong love and a medical system that couldn't save his friend Thompson. He really wanted to live, to be a normal person, to see the world outside the hospital. He even wanted new shoes. He wrote in his memoir about feeling so lonely and hopeless it tested everything he was. But even with all the reasons to doubt, Henry made a huge decision. He decided to stay. He told his father he would remain at Lhasa, waiting for these new experimental drugs. It was amazing how he took charge and trusted them even when he felt completely hopeless. And then, another big moment of faith, this time from his mother, Isatu. The next morning, she arrived not to make demands, but to say sorry for what her husband had done. She looked at Dr. Giram and said, "My husband already gave up, but I am not giving up on you, Dr. Giram. I am giving you my faith, my life, my son." This is what really matters, right? This amazing hope and trust even when everything seems stacked against you. Henry wasn't just another patient. As Dr. Giram put it, he is one person. A person, you understand? And anyway, what if he can be the first of many? It just shows how much we're all connected. One brave choice, one kind act, one bit of hope. It can really change a story that seemed already written.
The magic of a cure, recovery, and new beginnings. What if that trust was enough? What if Dr. Giram's brave decision, with Isatu's strong hope behind it, could really change Henry's story? The answer came incredibly fast, like a miracle. In just 1 week of Henry starting his new bedaquiline medicine, the one Dr. Giram fought hard for, they saw the first real signs of progress. It was like magic, Dr. Giram later said. He was talking about Henry's open sores on his neck and shoulder. For over a month, these wounds had been so painful, a clear sign of how bad the disease was. But now, they started to get better. The bumps shrank, and the open sores healed right before their eyes. Then another big change happened. In a week, Dr. Giram said, the boy started to eat well. Him eating again was a huge sign that life was coming back. In just 1 month, Henry gained 10 pounds, and for the first time in years, tests showed no bacteria in his spit. Henry, who had looked like a frail 9-year-old even though he was 17, wasn't just improving, he was truly healing. His mom, Isatu, was why he survived. Her strong, steady hope was like a lifeline for him. Henry later wrote a poem about it, a really touching one. "Mom, you are special and beautiful. You stand closer when everyone ran away, especially my cousin ran away, but you stood firm." And now, her faith was paying off. After 3 awful years in the hospital, going back and forth between Connaught and Lhasa, Henry finally went home. "It was the happiest moment of my life," Isatu told the author years later. But like many stories of beating TB, the magic cure didn't make everything else better. It didn't fix the unfair problems that led Henry to get so sick. So while they were happy he recovered, their life after treatment was still really tough. Isatu had lost her small business during all this, and their 2-room brick home was gone. They now lived in a smaller place. Its rusty metal roof leaked non-stop during Freetown's long rainy season, so they had to move their mattresses to dodge the drips. The apartment was dark, with no electricity, deep inside a crowded slum. Some days they still didn't have enough food. Henry, now a strong young man with a clear jawline, admitted, "Life had many difficulties. There are so many problems." But Isatu, looking at her son, alive and whole, would always say, "But I see you alive again. I look at you and you are alive. My son Henry is alive.
Challenging the scarcity mindset, cost-effectiveness, and profit. Henry, a strong young man, talked about life being full of problems and so many limits, but his mom, Isatu, just saw her son alive again. It was a huge deal. So you have to wonder, how could someone whose life was saved so completely still face so many problems, especially when we've had a TB cure for ages? The real answer, something not many people know, is that these limits aren't random. They're a direct result of how we, as a global community, decide what human lives are worth, and how we totally mess up when we think about cost and profit when people are suffering. Most rich countries only pay attention to TB when it's framed as a huge, scary threat, the superbug story. That idea that TB could become immune to all our medicines really pushes people to act. It's that quiet worry that says, it might not be here yet, but when it is, it'll be too late. And just so you know, that can actually happen. But here's the crazy part. For billions of people, the superbug problem is already real. They don't have good ways to fight TB. Not because the tools don't exist, but because we just haven't managed to get the cure to where the sickness is. So why this massive screw-up? Why is there such a huge gap between what we could do and what's actually happening? The answer comes down to a really weird, almost unbelievable choice we've made as a group. We just don't put enough money into it. Think about this. For a crazy 46 years, between 1966 and 2012, we made no new drugs for TB. 46 years. It's one of the strangest, most confusing decisions ever. Why? Because there's not much money in it. New antibiotics aren't prescribed as often as, say, blood pressure pills, so they're less profitable. This means drug companies focused on making money don't bother making new ones. And when they do come out, they're often super expensive. This lack of investment is the main reason antibiotics are losing their power, not because the bacteria are just failing on their own. But the problem goes even deeper. It even affects the treatments we do have. Look at rifampin, a key medicine for TB. Back in the 1960s, when it first came out, people got 600 milligrams a day. Not because that was the best dose, but because everyone thought it was the cheapest dose that still worked. And here's the crazy part. We've been giving people too little rifampin for 50 years. Dr. Carol Mitnick, who knows a lot about TB, told us this shocking fact. She said we still use old prices from 1969 to figure out how much things cost. She calls this a failure of imagination and a mentality of scarcity. What it means is patients stay sicker longer, they spread the disease more easily, and a TB becomes harder to treat, all to save a little money at first, which ends up costing way more in human pain and overall public health issues. Or think about the Gene Expert test. It's an amazing modern tool that can tell a doctor within hours if someone has TB, and even which medicines will work. It's like having a crystal ball for treatment. But here's the kicker. Danaher, the company making these machines, uses a razor blade business model. They sell the machines cheap, but the actual test cartridges are way too expensive. Just testing one person can cost over half of what a country like Sierra Leone spends on healthcare per person per year. So because of cost effectiveness, people like Henry got much worse tests. This made their treatment slower and helped the disease become harder to fight. But get this, studies actually show that every dollar spent on TB care can bring back up to $46 in benefits. It's such a confusing, sad problem. So this all makes you ask a big question. What kind of world puts making eyelashes longer ahead of curing malaria or TB? That's what happens when the market decides our healthcare priorities. It's a moral failure, a clear sign that something is just plain wrong with how we set our goals. But here's the big, hopeful truth. We don't have to stick with these systems. Like Dr. Carol Mitnick said so well, this is a human-manufactured problem that needs a human solution. These aren't like natural disasters, they're choices we made, and we can and should unmake them. We have the power, even beyond just market forces, to see human health not as something to buy and sell, but as a shared priority for all of us.
Virtuous cycles in action. Peru, Fumeza, and patent fights. We can choose to make human health a shared priority, not just something to buy. We have that power, beyond what the market dictates. And when we do really decide to make health a shared priority, when we gather that courage and work together, amazing things start to happen. We begin to turn bad situations into good ones. A great example of this started in Peru in the early 1990s. There, a global health group called Partners in Health, known locally as Socios en Salud, decided to fight a truly terrible idea everyone seemed to agree on. Back then, if you lived in a poor country and got multi-drug-resistant TB, MDR-TB, the World Health Organization's advice was basically what Dr. Carol Mitnick chillingly described as supportive therapy. She told me it basically meant put sick people in a hut on the side of the road and wait for them to die. Sounds awful, right? But they actually thought treating MDR-TB was too expensive for poor countries. But Partners in Health refused to accept this. So Dr. Jim Kim and his team started treating MDR-TB patients in a poor neighborhood in Lima. They gave full support, with treatment plans made just for each person, and even helped with money so patients could eat. It was a huge job, and it came with tough choices. Jim Kim even talked about a terrible choice they had to make. We actually had to make a choice that we would not feed 4,000 more children in Haiti. That shows you the kind of sacrifices they made. But guess what? Their results were amazing. More than 85% of their patients in Peru got better. That's as good as what the best hospitals in rich countries achieved. They proved without a doubt that you could cure MDR-TB even in poor places. This wasn't just medicine, it completely changed what people thought was impossible into something real. And it cut the cost of a 2-year treatment from $15,000 all the way down to $1,500. And the good changes kept spreading. It really showed how powerful people working together can be. Often it's led by the people who know what's at stake the most, TB survivors themselves. Take Fumeza Tisile, a young woman from South Africa. She got TB when she was a freshman in college. She went through years of treatment, lost her hearing completely because of harsh side effects, and took tens of thousands of pills. But Fumeza, with another survivor named Nandita Venkatesan, wouldn't let their suffering be for nothing. They started a brave fight against the drug company giant Johnson & Johnson. J&J was trying a sneaky trick called patent evergreening. This meant they wanted to keep control over bedaquiline, a drug that saves lives for MDR-TB, and keep its price super high. So what happened next really shows how powerful regular people can be. Because of strong arguments and legal action in India and loud protests from activists everywhere, J&J had to give in. The result? The price of bedaquiline dropped by more than 60% almost overnight. Something that was way too expensive suddenly became much easier to get. It's a clear example of what historian Christian McMillan means when he says cost-effectiveness is a moving target. When people's determination and working together push prices down, the whole idea of what's affordable or possible completely changes. This isn't just about saving lives, it's about giving people back their dignity and showing that we can pick a world where health is for everyone, not just a luxury for a few.
The social determinants of health. Beyond biomedical solutions, things that used to be way too expensive suddenly became much more available. This really shows how, like historian Christian McMillan put it, cost-effectiveness is a moving target. When people work together to bring prices down, what we see as affordable or possible completely changes. This isn't just about saving lives, it's about giving people back their dignity and proving we can choose a world where health is a priority for everyone, not just something for the rich. But here's a secret.
a big idea that totally changed how I saw illness. What if our idea of health is too small? What if fighting for human dignity and access to medicine is just one part of a much bigger, tougher puzzle? We usually see illness as our body breaking down, something doctors fix with drugs and surgeries. But what if it's also, just as deeply, a failure of how our society works? Not just germs, but injustice itself. We're talking about the social determinants of health, those huge connected systems that decide if we live, die, or just struggle all the time. Think about it. Things like enough food, a place to live, school, clean water, even how you get around. These aren't separate from healthcare. They are healthcare. Take the sad example of cholera in Haiti. When someone gets cholera, is it just caused by the Vibrio cholerae bacteria? Or is it also because of dirty water, widespread poverty, and the awful way the disease was brought back by aid workers after the 2010 earthquake? The bacteria is the direct cause, sure, but the things that made it way worse are all social, all about the system. They're about how we've built the world. And this, my friends, is where contemporary tuberculosis really shows us the truth. While we know TB is caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis, the book makes a startling, almost conspiracy-like argument. TB in the 21st century is not really caused by a bacteria that we know how to kill. No, TB in the 21st century is really caused by those social determinants of health. At their core, these are just systems humans built for getting and sharing resources. The real cause of contemporary tuberculosis is, for lack of a better term, us. So we, humanity, are both the problem and the potential cure. It's a crazy thought, isn't it? To show how connected all these systems really are, I often think about something simple that happened to me. Not long ago, I stepped on a nail in my backyard. Just a small accident, right? The next morning, I drove to a nearby clinic for a tetanus shot. A simple shot to prevent something bad. But for that simple shot to happen, a whole bunch of strong systems had to work perfectly together. I needed healthcare I could get to, of course with insurance to pay for it. I needed power all the time to keep that vaccine cold and still good. I needed good transportation systems to get the vaccine, the needles, the nurses' gloves to the clinic. I needed a school system good enough to train that nurse and doctor. What I needed wasn't just a shot, but a whole world of basic services working perfectly. And that, I've realized, shouldn't be a luxury in our world with so much, but somehow it still is.
A world without TB deaths. The Search, Treat, Prevent, STP, vision. A world where everything just works right. You know, I've realized that shouldn't be a fancy extra in our rich world, but somehow it still is. Here's the kicker, though. For tuberculosis, this idea of things working perfectly, where nobody dies from a sickness we can prevent and cure, isn't just a silly fantasy. We actually can make it happen. So, get this. A super smart TB doctor, Dr. KJ Sung, once asked me something that really changed how I saw things. He said, "This year, 1.3 million people will die from TB. How many of them would live if they had the same health care I have?" I instantly thought, none. Zero. And that's the wild, almost secret truth about fighting TB. We could live in a world where nobody dies from it. Getting rid of it completely might be a huge long shot. This tiny bug has been around for 3 million years, but 0 deaths. We can absolutely do that. So, how do we get there? It's not some super secret ancient map. It's a clear plan put together by people who care and scientists. They call it STP, Search, Treat, Prevent. It's simple, but it can do so much good. First, we search. This means we go out and find people with TB, house by house, all over the world.
We hire special health workers to visit communities and find TB before someone gets really sick or needs to go to the hospital. Think of those mobile X-ray trucks from the 1950s that used to go everywhere in the US. We need that kind of early testing everywhere. Then we treat. For most patients, we give them strong antibiotics for 4 months. If someone has a tougher kind of TB that's resistant to many drugs, they get a 6-month course. It's not just about having the medicine. It's about making sure people get it, keep taking it, and have help along the way. Finally, we prevent. When someone is diagnosed, we give their family members a really important 1-month medicine to stop them from getting sick too. This is how we stop the TB from spreading to new people. This whole plan, even though it sounds simple, makes a huge difference. And guess what? It's not just the right thing to do, it's also a surprisingly smart investment. The WHO asked for a study in 2024, and what they found was wild. For every dollar spent fighting TB, we get back something like $39 to $46 in benefits. Seriously, think about that. It's not just saving people's lives, it helps economies grow, makes communities stronger, and lets people really live their lives. You can see how well this works in people like Henry. I met him in Sierra Leone. He fought drug-resistant TB for years. He was scared and lonely in Laka Hospital, afraid he'd die like so many others. But Henry made it. And his story didn't stop once he got better. His life shows how much good we can create. Henry got into the University of Sierra Leone. He's studying human resources and management there. Now he's an activist. He fights the bad feelings people have about TB and helps others learn about it. He shares his story and what life is like in Freetown on his own YouTube channels. He even has one for his mom, Izatu, where she shares old Sierra Leonean recipes. He tells other survivors to go out and preach that TB can be cured. His life used to be all about being sick. Now, it's about learning, connecting with people, and really wanting to help his community heal. Henry's fight, his strong will to live, and the help he got from people, it all proves what we can do. Stopping TB worldwide isn't just about medicine and tests. It's about all of us deciding to help, working together across the globe, and making sure we help those who need it most. It means choosing to believe that every person's life matters, no matter their situation. And it means facing the unfair reasons why this disease keeps happening. After all, like the book says, we caused today's TB problem. So with that same incredible power, we also have to be the solution.